happy that very easily, even at our 2G internet connectivity, we are able to connect to the state of America, where, our students would be very happy to listen to our resource person. And I'm sure they'll give their feedback and inputs. And I'm sure this webinar, and I'm so happy that very easily, even at our 2G internet connectivity, we are able to connect to you. And I'm sure our students are going to benefit a lot from you. So without standing in between the resource person and the participants, and I'm also a participant, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Professor Lakshmi to please start this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for your
Now
kind.
coming back to coming back to my speaker, she's quite an enigma, a maverick, I must say, Professor Lakshmi Bandlamudi. She's a professor of psychology at LaGuardia Community College, City University of New York. Her research and teaching interests are focused on the area of human development with special emphasis on dialogic consciousness. She grew up in Chennai in South India, which was a great cultural center, and hence concert halls and theaters were an integral part of her formative years. She has had a lifelong fascination with epic tales, instilled in her by her grandmother, who was a master storyteller, she tells me. And this experiential knowledge eventually developed into scholarly inquiry that became a book, Dialogics of Self, the Mahabharata and Culture, the History of Understanding and Understanding History. She earned her PhD from CUNY New York, and her professional expertise lies in dialogic consciousness, cultural psychology, human development, and Bakhtin studies. She is a maverick, as I told you. She speaks 6 languages: English, Hindi, Kannada, Sanskrit, Telugu, and Tamil, and has many honors to her awards, and many honors and awards to her credit. She's a distinguished fellow, CUNY, Fulbright Nehru Senior Research Fellow, Fulbright Hayes Scholar, China, Fulbright Hayes Scholars, Bulgaria and Romania, and I might have missed some. This is all I had with me. She has numerous papers and several books to her credit that include Bakhtinian Explorations of Indian Culture, Pluralism, Dogma, Dialogue Through History. Her personal interests are as varied as her academic interests. She enjoys trekking and has trekked in the Himalayas, Tibet, Nepal, and India. And her spiritual journey to Mount Kailash was recorded in a book, Movements with the Cosmic Dancer, on pilgrimage to Kailash Mansarovar. And the foreword to the book is by none other than His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The most significant and transformative moment of her life occurred, as she has told me, when she encountered the works of Mikhail Bakhtin as a graduate student. And then she devoted 25 years to the principles of dialogism that have guided her scholarly work. And she believes that dialogue and development is an in-depth exploration of all her works, and that such a reality necessitates dialogue, and actively responding to that necessity leads to the development. The varied works of Bakhtin that span several decades, passing through the most tumultuous period of Russian history, are brought under one banner of the 3 Ds, as she calls it: difference, dialogue, and development. And the composite features of these 3 Ds emerge as leitmotif of most of her work. Without further ado, I hand you the virtual mic. Lakshmi, take over and do your thing. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Abhina. That was a very detailed introduction, and I'm truly humbled and honored. This is really a very significant moment for me. And I'll tell you, I'll start with the personal, and then I'll go into the scholarly, and why Mikhail Bakhtin's arrival, rather, in Kashmir is a very significant moment. And the reasons are many. And so it seems very appropriate that we hold this webinar, even under these difficult times. So when I encountered Bakhtin's works, and I say this to my students all the time, when a really fascinating book falls in your lap, then life changes. Nothing changes your life as much as a book, because so that is the power of written words. So even after they're long gone, you are very much sort of fascinated by their works, their words speak to you, in with such clarity that it becomes your life mission. So, but when I encountered Bakhtin's works, I encountered it very early on when Bakhtin's works were. I mean, this was in late 80s that his work started coming out. In other words, translations of Bakhtin's works to the English-speaking world. So early on itself, I pretty much sort of caught on to that and sort of grew with that evolution of Bakhtin's works pretty much globally. Yeah. But one thing that became clear to me when I started engaging with his works, and that was, my God, it brought me back to the Indian classical thinking, because no thinker in the modern times has been so fascinated with the plenitude of differences in the world, and how the diverse thinking. Diversity doesn't mean who's a Kashmiri, who's a Punjabi, and who's a Bengali. Yeah? But diversity means diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, competing viewpoints, the very basis for growth and development. And so just by the sheer composition of the culture and the rich, varied intellectual traditions of India, incidentally, most of them come from Kashmir. So that's why to me it is really very personally meaningful. And in 2013, I had convened the Bakhtin conference, not necessarily as a mechanical import of Bakhtin's ideas into the Indian world, but I really sincerely felt that he was the most appropriate to make sense of the enormous variety, that is true to the Indian culture, from Kanyakumari to Kashmir, right? Such varied variations that you find. And I thought it would be really very delightful to bring him, and because without compromising on the integrity of the cultural ethos, you're also able to make sense of literary texts, cultures, and so on. So in 2013, I had delivered a lecture because before the conference, I had been to Jammu and I had given a lecture there. And I actually even crossed the border symbolically at that Jammu, border crossing, which was really sort of maneuvered or done by a very good Dogri writer. I will weave into my talk about his writing. I think he's probably logged in, Shailendra Singh. And so there is a banyan tree over there where half the tree is in India and half the tree is in Pakistan. So using that, and there are two platforms. So using that as a kind of an emblem, I wrote about finding platforms for dialogue. So I came to India to convene a conference on Bakhtin and dialogue. And actually I wrote a piece after that, reviewing his book, Shailendra Singh's book, called Hashiye Par. So to me, it was doubly sort of rewarding because even before the conference started, I found platforms of dialogue, and I wrote about this in 2000, a little later than that, called Finding Platforms of Dialogue in J&K. So that is the personal story of how exciting and meaningful this is for me. And the second is, of course, as I said, intellectual, the theoretical. So what Bakhtin inspired me was he took me to the works of Bhartrhari and Abhinav Gupta and many other Kashmiri thinkers. So Kashmir, the reason that I gave this title, the valley of with a rich history of confluence of ideas, was that not that I am a historian, so I don't want to venture out too much into that subject matter that I don't know enough. But what little I know is that there has been an incredible tradition of dialogue, meaning dialogues within systems like Sufi traditions in Kashmir, and also the Hindu traditions of Kashmir Saivism. They've dealt with the problem of the issue, or the issue of dialogue, in a much more comprehensive, in a deeper manner. So long before, so this was something that I wrote in the book, and I still believe that long before ideas about dialogue, diversity, differences, and that being the very basis for knowledge, it became fashionable in the Western world. Very much the ancient India dealt with these problems. Long ago. So that is so that's why to me today is a very special moment in order for me to communicate these ideas. So now let me get to this. So before, once again, I just want to thank Dr. Yasmin Ashai and Dr. Rabina Habib, of course, my good friend Shabir Mirza. And Shabir told me that his father, an eminent Kashmiri poet, Mohammed Zaman Azurdaji, will also be joining. And it is great honor. Even to share a podium would have been an honor, but for him to hear my talk is really very special. And what I'm hoping is to, I can't talk about dialogue and not actually have a dialogue. So I'll take about 50 minutes, or that's what I'm told, right, Abina? About 50 minutes, have an hour that I speak. And then there will be some time for Q&A. And I shall do my best sorry, I thought I was, I'm just trying to meddle with this because the screen is very blank and I feel I'm talking to a blank screen. So I was just trying to focus on Abina or somebody, so that anyway, if someone can help me out on that, it will be good. Because what I see is Sabia Zara. So I'm glad, but I can't see your face. So that is the
can you help?
In any case, thank you. Okay, now it feels
audible, ma'am. You've also come audible.
Yes, is it audible? Are you
audible?
Yeah, we can hear you very clearly.
Okay. All right.
Audible.
Okay. It's just that I see a blank screen.
Rashid, maybe she needs to focus on somebody's face. Just show her someone.
I know.
Maybe yourself.
If you can go back and forth between few people, that would really be helpful.
Yes.
Otherwise, it feels like I'm talking to some wall or something, so that doesn't feel good.
Sometimes that's the latest setting on your computer, so but you're quite audible, and the video is also coming clear.
Okay, very good, very good. Thank you very much. All right, so now let's begin. Let me begin the talk. I hope I have thanked everyone. So Mikhail Bakhtin was born in 1895 and he passed away in 1975, living through the most tumultuous period in Russian history. Because he like many other Russian intellects at that time, lived through a very dark period. It was very difficult for him. First and foremost, he was not this academic empire builder. And that's what fascinated me towards him. Because when you are not an academic empire builder, you sort of give insights into how to approach a text, how to read a text, how to uncover hidden meanings in the text. So there are lots of benefits because they don't have one particular agenda. They are not driven by one particular political agenda. They're interested in the dialogues, diversity of voices in the in the text, and so they provide encourage. When you read Bakhtin, or I call it entering into the Bakhtin's world, and you really have to do that. Carol Emerson says, that so much of Bakhtin's world was a world of philosophical conversations carried out, between him and his what is called as the Bakhtin circle. Vast majority of them were shot dead by the KGB. The then Soviet Union. That was the fate of so many intellects in those days. But it was carried out over endless cups of tea and cigarette and in small rooms. So it's almost like listening to a chamber concert. You have to enter his world. You have to read his world. You should hear him. You should hear him sort of pointing out to the voices in the text. And his favorite writer was definitely Dostoevsky, and he's my favorite too. So there is something sort of very rewarding when you're not an academic empire builder, that you are really engaging with the text. You're not necessarily sort of staging your performance. You don't have a set agenda, and a set agenda itself would be an assault, an affront to dialogue, because then you're really caught up in your own monologism, meaning a single voiced kind of a discourse. So you have to have this sort of multi-voiced approach and competing, dialogues, right, between different kind of philosophies. So those are some of the most important. And in fact, that's what sort of led me to my work. And I just want to show the book, as Abina rightly pointed out, Dialogics of Self, the Mahabharata, and Culture. Now, what is it that this book sort of deals with? Before I get into the problems of understanding history, I want to talk about the problems or the necessary conditions for dialogue. One is a dialogic consciousness by the self. That is very critical. The self must be open to cede their territory and engage in a dialogue. A text must, great literary texts that stand the test of time are very open-ended texts. They invite the reader into a dialogue. They try to sort of, basically literature has always been, good literature is something that we, actually I'm seeing my own face in the video. I like to see somebody else's face. Okay. I'm trying to maneuver this by pointing to Abina or somebody else, but I'm not able to. Anyway, whoever the moderator is, I hope you help me out in this.
Can't you see any of the videos?
Show her my face, Rashid
so
sir.
that's not wonderful. It feels very narcissistic, and that's quite goes
evident.
against the dialogue. So you need the other. You need the other to give you the feedback. So in any case, so the open text, something like, and in the Russian literary tradition, there's always been this debate between Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. And from Bakhtin's mind, Tolstoy's was a very formally structured, a set kind of an philosophy, a message that is communicated. Whereas Dostoevsky's characters are really so tormented, and they will be engaging in this kind of intra-psychic dialogue, notes from the underground, or whether it is Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, or and so on. So that fascinated Bakhtin. And to me, when I read his Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics, that was a sort of a moment of awakening. I said, oh my God, this sounds like Mahabharata to me. So that is how so Mahabharata by its very nature is a very open-ended text. It has no beginning, no end. It is a very fluid text. It is packed with debates between divergent viewpoints. Abhinay, I know I saw that you work on gender issues.
Yes.
So Draupadi is the one character, heroine, who embodies the ethic of rage and retaliation. Yudhishthir is somebody who embodies the ethic of restraint and reconciliation. Very different. But when you read the text, what an lively debate they have. Right, as to so it's and each one comes up with their own sort of history and with their own agenda and with their own justified grievances, and so those things sort of begin to clash, and that's why to me I approach the text of Mahabharata. So one is the dialogic consciousness, one is a dialogic text that is essential, and the third one is cultural conditions must be conducive for dialogue. If you are living in a very oppressive conditions, then dialogue is really defeated. It is not made possible. And so you need to have that open. So open societies, open minds can never fear dialogue. Dialogue requires a certain confidence, of the mind and of the society to kind of cede the territory and make room for others. And that is very critical. So anyway, now let me go about in a systematic manner. What were some of the Bakhtin's works? And because this is a webinar, you can't possibly, do PowerPoint and things like that. So I'm just going to do the old-fashioned way, show the books that I have stacked up here of Bakhtin's works and go about it. I mean, I won't be able to cover all the works, but I want to give the students and the faculty some sort of a broad sense to generate sufficient interest in his works. So the early works of Bhakti is toward a philosophy of the act, which is very interesting. Here he talks about ground, basically these are all debates, philosophical debates that he has had, he was having with Kantians, neo-Kantians, because he fundamentally did not necessarily celebrate the transcendental aesthetics of Kant. Transcendental means that you can transcend your unique position that you hold in culture and in time and space, and that you can have a roving perspective. And that, Bakhtin says, is an impossibility. So unlike the transcendental aesthetics of Kant, Bakhtin says, look, it is impossible to overcome. You cannot be situated in one place, right? Located in one space and have a perspective of the entire, landscape, because that is impossible. Because from every vantage point that I hold, there is only so much that I can see. So because my vision is limited, in other words, I can't see my face. Unfortunately, I'm seeing it because I don't know how to fix this problem.
I think we can help you, Rashid. Why don't we help?
Trying to see either Abhina or somebody else, but not my own face.
I think you can see all the people whose videos are on.
Yes, I know, but I am not able to...
Okay, put the spotlight on different people, Rashid. Maybe put it on ma'am for some time. Yasmin ma'am pe rakhiye thodi der.
Okay, if someone can do it, it will be great. In any case...
it has to be done from your end.
What must I do? I take the...
Can you see any of the videos?
I can see the videos, but I just want to click on it.
Okay, the spot. She wants the spotlight on someone else.
Pointer to the video, over the video?
Yeah, I did.
Right click.
I have a Macintosh. There's no right click or left click.
Okay, double click, double tap.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Now that's helpful. I've never finally figured it out.
Yeah, we are all
Okay.
figuring it out, so that's okay.
I know, that's live on YouTube, so I just better be proper. So what Bakhtin is saying is we cannot transcend. It is impossible to overcome the solipsism, meaning that we are located in a certain space. That's it. That's what creates the necessity for the other. So rather than extending the transcendental aesthetics, what Bakhtin is talking about is transgredients. It's almost like various ingredients are brought together with competing voices, each person located in different time and space. And therefore, the only thing that you can do, you need the other. See, the necessity of the other is because we simply do not have the categories of the mind. Kant would have these logical, mathematical categories of the mind that are universal and they are not contingent upon time and space. And therefore, we will be able to just simply, overcome all that. And that is the basis for transcendence. What Bakhtin is telling is it is impossible. We don't have these categories of interpretation are fundamentally, culturally generated, they are historically generated. They are not just simply logical and mathematical, categories. And that's why, taking from Gadamer, the subtitle of one of my early book is History of Understanding and Understanding of History. So I am in addressing the problem with Mahabharata. I was approaching it as an epistemological problem. How do we do the interpretation of an ancient text? So the same law that applies to the, one text needs another text and divergent viewpoints. The same is true when we approach theories or when we approach how do we interpret history. History needs, the past needs the present needs the past. It's a necessity. You cannot uncover history as if this has, okay, as I'm sorry, I just read something there and I got distracted. Sorry about that. You cannot understand the past without the present. You cannot understand the self without the presence of the other, right? One text needs another text. There needs to be diversity. One culture needs another culture. In one of his books, Bakhtin very beautifully says that culture reveals itself in the eyes of the other culture. I don't know what it means to be, when I was in India, I don't know what it means to be an Indian. You just simply live that. But when you step out of that country and you meet other people, then suddenly all these, cultural codes that are hidden become visible. And that visibility sometimes creates a certain anxiety. And this is where dialogicality is very critical. Two things can happen, extremities can happen when that visibility occurs. You will either see, you will completely detach yourself from your cultural traditions or your past or anything and be lost in the cultural flux because you're not rooted, you're uprooted, right? Because you don't want to deal with the past. It's too messy, it's too problematic. That's one extremity. The other extremity is you create imaginary homelands. You create romantic past. Back then, back there. Very powerful. So it's almost like you imagine, oh, back then and back there, everything was so wonderful and the modern world is horrible. Well, there is nothing so romantic about the past. The past also had their own set of conflicts. And by learning that conflicts, we must know how not to repeat it. But conflict is, as in Mahabharata or even in Bhakti, it's a reality. But conflict resolution is achieved through a dialogue. That is what is sort of very critical. So for in the toward the philosophy of act, what Bakhtin is saying is he's shunned kind of phantom, ideas. Everything has to be contextualized, historicized. We cannot understand anything when you remove it out of it. So meanings are not contained only in the text. Meanings of the past. So when I say history of understanding and understanding of history, what I mean is that we don't just simply receive a text, we also receive the categories of interpretation of the text. So there is a certain method to this madness, so to speak. So we don't just uncover history, whether it is psychological or sociological. Any psychologist, since I'm a psychologist, not a clinical one, but I'm a theorist of mind, any psychologist will say, we feel very tormented and the past haunts us when the present is really very, troubling. Whereas when you're feeling happy, you're not haunted by the past. So, but we can solve problems not by denying history, but facing the history in all its complexities and darkness and so on. So Bakhtin's life itself is a testimony as to how he survived, because Bakhtin lived through the most challenging times. As I said earlier, he was not an academic empire builder. He didn't have a set agenda. He didn't have the glamour of just simply being a university professor. He was teaching in a very small place. And there was so much, sort of censorship in his works, because that's what happened to most. Another Russian thinker that I'm very much engaged with is Lev Semenovich Vygotsky, who was a theorist of the mind. And Vygotsky was Jewish. And so he faced so much, but he died very young, by 1934. But for many decades, their works were banned. So there's an interesting story about art and answerability. And this is what is sort of most relevant. All the books are relevant, but this one is really very significant. To me, it was, quite a magical moment when I encountered this text. What does he deal with? These are the early, in order to understand Bakhtin's later works that are a bit more accessible, we have to sort of go deeper into the philosophical works, because that is where the truth is, the foundation is. So in Art and Answerability, he is dealing with the relationship, first and foremost, the relationship between art and life. How does that's my book on Mahabharata is really about that. How does a lived life, right, engage with a living text, right? So that point is only through the connection of answerable. Art is not life. Art is too high flown. Art is too grand. The humble prose of life cannot catch up with the grand poetry, But at the same time, art cannot remain unanswerable to the paradoxes of life. And life cannot remain untouched by art. So the connection, the link between art and life is really the answerability. That through my lived life, avastha, whatever you want to call it, right, to the paradox of life, I want to sort of raise questions to the text. So the text is answerable. Otherwise, how would that connection be made? How would I internalize? And he talks about the relationship between the author and the hero. And that is what is very significant. And you can read that on many levels, author and hero. The creator and the created. The creator cannot, even though it is his own creation, the hero is his own creation, he needs to relinquish, the author needs to relinquish the surplus of vision. You know, you cannot just simply have a semantic authority on your characters. You cannot create a dead consciousness. You have to have a living consciousness. Right? So the real aesthetic vision or the aesthetic activity begins after you endow the hero. You know, at the initial phases of creation, the creator has an absolute authority. You have all the material that you have gathered in order to draw the characterological profile of the hero and the characters. But as they gain their voice, right, the author needs to relinquish and allow the hero, right, or the characters to find their identity in a living, complex world. You know, so you have no semantic authority. Same way, a parent, right? I'll tell you, as a psychologist, I think you're. Anyway, I thought it was me, Abina.
Yeah, it was you also. And my friend
you.
who joined us just now on video.
Oh, okay. Hello. So even if it is your own creation, you need to relinquish that in order to make room for the other. Let them find their voice. Isn't that the ultimate struggle we all have? You know, separation and individuation for a child is needed. You know, they cannot be completely overshadowed by their parents. They have to find their own identity, astitva. They have to find their identity on their own and live as free thinking human beings. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, see, I am very opposed to this hyper individualism of the Western world, and so was Bhakti, you know, because there are ethical considerations. So in author-hero relationships, he's not only talking about author and the hero, he's also talking about self-other relations. You know, how do I sort of give a fair hearing to the other? So he says the very identity formation is in a kind of a triadic relationship. How do I see myself, right? How do I see myself, the self for itself? How does the other see me? And how do I see the other? All these things, how do I see myself, how I see the others, and how others see me, are never going to be sort of absolutely identical. It will be impossible. There will be a disjunction. That is simply because we are located in different time and space. But with that gap, right, allows us to see, here is a very interesting philosophical paradox, we could say. Yeah. On one hand, we have to recognize the necessity of the other, right? Because we cannot transcend our solipsism. We don't have the categories of the mind to be able to do that. And therefore, we need the other. But we must also resist the oppressive other, right? Somebody cannot invade me. I mean, I have to keep myself, my borders, porous. But Bakhtin uses the word of benevolent borders, border negotiation. You cannot completely open the border and say, everybody come in, you will be invaded. You can use this in a metaphorical way, you know. Yes, I open myself with a certain caution to invite the other, but at the same time, I should not be so foolish to completely relinquish and leave my doors unlocked. You know, that's foolish. He doesn't sort of advocate that. But going back to you, Abina, since you work on gender issues, if women or any other group they have been defined by the other men or oppressed groups, right? If the master always tells the slave what the slave is like, the slave doesn't have the authority to tell the master what master is like. That is an invasion. That is, you are trespassing into somebody's territory. So on one hand, you cannot completely negate the other, but you must also resist the oppressive other. So where is that room? It is precisely that gap, that in-between space between the self and the other, how I see myself. When I look at myself in the mirror, I'm not going to be able to see just this is how I see myself. That I itself is a social construct. I see myself how others see me, and I see myself how I respond to how I think others are seeing me. Right? So there is quite a bit of a complexity of voices, even when I simply stand in front of the mirror and see. Right? So the body, so I just want to introduce at this moment a minor, not minor, very important, Abhinav Gupta from the great state of Kashmir, region of Kashmir. So he also talks about this mirror, pratibimba. And he says that the mirror has to be the divine, so that when you look at yourself, there is a vastness of consciousness, because the body is a finite entity, but the inner landscape of the consciousness is really open-ended, limitless, infinite, right? The expansiveness is really immeasurable. How then do we get to that level, right? So there's a very interesting kind of, so what Bakhtin is talking about in this author-hero relationship is first and foremost about architectonics. How do you gather the material, right, in order to compose your text, right? And how do you sort of achieve a sort of a metamorphosis, or rather a kind of, you have to consummate. Very often, many literary texts fail only because you have not been able to achieve that. Secondly, aesthetic vision is something that reaches the consciousness. Declarative statements do not reach the consciousness. They are just empty politics. It's waste of time. I wrote in my book that it's very easy to jump onto the bandwagon of some kind of shrill political slogans and so on. But what is really challenging and what is really important is to cede your territory and give a fair hearing to the other. To cede your territory, give a fair hearing to the other, accommodate the other, speak to the other. The other cannot be a narcissistic extension of the self. So Bakhtin would not even acknowledge that, the idea that love thy neighbor as as you would love yourself. No, neighbor is very different, and you have to see and appreciate and respect him or other because he is the other, not because he's just like you. You can't pull everyone into your own orbit. Right? So, and as I said, Bakhtin says there is no such thing as an aesthetic ought, an ethical ought. This is what you ought to do, right? But rather what is ethically valid, what is aesthetically valid at a given time, in given space. Everything is very context dependent and history dependent. History cannot be a prisoner. It cannot trap you. But we must understand history in order to be able to bring in new perspectives. And history is something that we can recover something of value from the past. Not simply know but the past had a lot of conflicts. But more importantly, how did the past resolve conflicts? See, even children, when they witness parents quarreling or arguing, they must witness the conflict, but they must also see how they resolve the conflict. Conflict resolution is also important, right? Not just simply cry over all the conflicts and that it is unsolvable. No, nothing is unsolvable. That is the value of a dialogic relations, to sort of give a fair here. So fundamentals of philosophy, questions concerning epistemology, ethics, because we have a certain emotional responsiveness to the other. Don't position yourself as the savior. Bakhtin had no patience for self-appointed saviors of the world. People can be, you have to provide room for people to save themselves and provide them with the tools. But don't tell them what to do and what not to do. Don't get too preachy. You have to sort of, education is that prime value. That's right. Let me know if there are any questions as I move on, because I get very easily carried away with these ideas. So briefly, I think I can't hear you. Did you speak with me, Abina?
I was just saying that we don't have many questions so far, so you can continue.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. So the next work that Bakhtin talks about is dialogic imagination. So in dialogic imagination, first of all, this book led to my work on Mahabharata, because so much of the Western world is very much caught up in the novel as an emblem of human consciousness. The epic is beyond the zone of familiar contact, and it is a story that is done, and the last nail on the coffin is already hit, and you can't touch it. These epic characters do not roam around in our present world. This is so markedly different in the Indian situation. So that's why I dealt with the Mahabharata. And it's always very difficult for me in the Western world to talk about it, because for them, epic is, whether it is the epics, Iliad and Odyssey in the Western world, they don't have the same degree of presence in the present world as we have it in India. And that's not just simply because our sense of timing is very different. Our time is, there is the sort of great time that Bakhtin talks about. There is and Bhartrihari, another philosopher, thinker from Kashmir region, he talks about how the time is like a flow of a river, and it picks up sort of fragments from the banks of the river, hides it, and then displaces what is in the deep waters into the, so there is a certain interesting kind of an exchange that takes place. So in the Indian context, and that I would say is very unique to India, unlike other, excuse me, cultures. So Bakhtin sort of talks about the epic and the novel distinction, and that is what I kind of challenged. Just give me a second. The other thing that he deals with, and he writes about the history of the novelistic discourse. Ancient texts, right, even until recent times, novels were not necessarily utilized as... Oh, sorry, I don't know who that is. Who's that? Novels...
Dr. Lakshmi, you are put on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Thank you. Okay. That's all right. This is the fun of world
I
life
had to put
interference.
everybody on mute, so you were also muted.
That's okay, no problem. So, so the ancient texts never had this division between tragedy and comedy. Everything that was tragic was also comical and comedy. So there was no sort of this division, these binaries, you know. He bemoans the loss of all that, you know, because it doesn't allow you. You know, modern literature has sort of dispensed with laughter. You know, even if you look at Indian movies, old Indian movies, they had a lot of comedy. You know, there were comedians, and the comedians played a very central role. You know, in sort of linking between divergent viewpoints, between heaven and earth, and so on and so forth. And that kind of division, right? The binaries, all kinds of binaries for Bakhtin is very problematic. Excuse me. Right? But the value of reading the dialogic imagination is the novelistic discourse. You know, the novelistic discourse is really about forms of time in, you know, Bakhtin has a very interesting understanding of the presence of time and space, right? He takes it from the Einsteinian physics, that these are very central to the, you know, any kind of a narrative. And in that, the texts that are very dormant, right, that are fixed, they have more spatial categories, whereas the dynamic texts are charged with temporality, time. Once again, this is where even Bhartrhari will talk about how Kala, time, is so central to giving the dynamic thrust to the text, right? Because it allows you to, it allows the transformation of the self. The text is speaking live. It is, you know, Nietzsche would call this as a mummified Egyptian consciousness. That's not what we want. We want a living consciousness. The text must be alive. The self must be alive. The cultural conditions must be vibrant and open, right? So the comedy, the laughter was so critical in Bakhtin's world because laughter is a close companion of truth. So satire, you know, the greatest work of satire comes from Kashmir. This is Kshemendra. This is called Samaya Matrika, or it's called The Courtesan's Keeper. This is a classic Kashmiri text from ancient. So this is, satire was very much an integral part. You know, it is really very bold. It is, yeah, in fact, I would say the ancient world was really bold in challenging all kinds of authority figures than what we have in the modern version. But challenge is not just simply a rebel without a cause. So the wise fool, the Vidushak, is not necessarily interested in completely dismantling, right? Whether it is the Shakespearean wise fool or whether it is the Indian Vidushak, they are not interested in completely destroying. But what they're interested in is to, you know, it's a corrective measure. You know, it's a corrective measure when things go so far away from truth, where you don't know the difference between sanctity and sanctimoniousness, right? You need something to correct it. You need some measure to correct it because you're straying far away from the stated norms, so to speak. And so when that happens, the only thing that is possible is to have laughter, satire. So in that carnivalesque laughter, I'll talk about carnival a little in a moment. So Bakhtin uses to sort of trace the history of novel or classify various types of novels in his essay on chronotopes, time and space. So that's why he always is pointing out the time when a text was written, the time when the text is being read are very different. And these temporalities, converge in the reading act. So you cannot completely go back, take an excursion, imaginary excursion to the time when the text was written. But you can take it, but you also have to return to your current position, because it is impossible to do that, right? And therefore, that's the reason that multiple chronotopes, Bhartrhari calls this as the multi-temporalities. Many kalas, many times kind of converge and they enter into a dialogue. And that's what is sort of would be the productive way. So earlier, I'm sorry, earlier when I said when these cultural codes reveal themselves in encounters with the other, two things can happen, as I said. One is total detachment from the cultural codes, and the other one is a romantic, sort of version or a romantic ideal of romantic past and imaginary homelands. But the real that encounter creates a possibility of a very creative understanding of the culture and of history. So the creative understanding comes up when whether the hero or the reader does not necessarily exert control over the text, but rather engages in a free-flowing dialogue between the text. So that is very critical. And any good literary text, it's not how thick the plot is, but how well the hero, the author rather, takes you into either the psychological landscape of the hero that is. So I like to bring to your attention, and I think the author is logged in. And this is by a Dogri writer, and I met him in 2013. The title of the book is Hashiye Par. Basically, I think it means in Dogri in the margins. So it's a simple story of a character named Madan or Madi that he calls. And all this character wants is a pakka house. He's living in this damp house, mud house, leaking, and it's so dirt poor, right? When the government announces that there are some provisions made for really very poor people to get some money from the government so that they can construct a pakka house, as he says, like a real stone, a brick house. So the chap goes and stands in the line and tries to get it. But his name is not even there in the government list, So he's tormented with this. How can anybody be more poor than me? I'm so dirt poor that if I cannot qualify myself for this allowance, who would be more qualified? So he takes you into the inner world, the psychological landscape. It does a very good job, and I must applaud her. And I wrote a review of this book in my essay on finding platforms of dialogue. So it's translated into English by Oxford University Press. So he takes you deep into that character's world. It's not like the story itself is a very simple story about this man's desire to have a normal home. That's all it is, house rather, rather than a thatched roof and mud walls and all that. That's all it is. But what he manages to do is takes you deep into the character's inner world so that you get a glimpse of the psychological intra-psychic dialogue and then there is through that intrapsychic dialogue, then he becomes a sharecropper, and then he finds a way, rather than being dependent on the government, he just figures out how to do it on his own. It's very empowering. And so it's I just don't like borrowed. There is a certain earthiness and certain authenticity to the text when people write about their own surroundings. I hope lots of literature comes out from Kashmir. I look forward to reading them because one thing that Bakhtin taught me, and recently I read a piece that was written by him called The Lie of the Rhetoric of Fear and Hope is really a sort of very misleading. And so the answer to that is really art and literature, because literature always has recorded, right, the human condition, the human challenges, the human limitations, the human foibles. Sadly, I must say that in the last several decades, in the Indian situation, it's all very borrowed categories and borrowed concepts. So I celebrate a kind of homegrown genre like Shailendra Singh's book, because it has a sort of the believability and the authenticity of a very grounded kind of a struggle. Right? And so like any dialogic text, Shailendra doesn't sort of control his character. Instead, the character just simply emerges. He doesn't pity his character. He just allows them, he just simply displays their struggle. And these are the features of a good, dialogic text. So all the classification of the novel, the various forms of space and time that emerge is from, and of course, the problems of Dostoevsky's poetics. Dostoevsky famously said in one of, I think it was The Idiot, he said, why did you write The Idiot? He said, well, to find the man in man. Right? To find the man and man.
To find the man and man.
To find so I think it's such a powerful
statement.
Sort of a statement because where is the human figure? Where is that human interaction? Where is that human avastha? So this is where I have a problem when you're social evaluations are integral to any interpretation. We cannot interpret and not evaluate. It doesn't happen that way. But at the same time, political agenda cannot override aesthetics. The aesthetic vision must be on a higher plane, because the aesthetic vision is the consciousness of a consciousness. It's a kind of a meta-awareness. Whereas social evaluation, and secondly, in the Russian traditions or in many of the, which is sort of completely distorted in this day and age, it is really, when you say ideology is only social evaluations. Social evaluations are integral to the human condition. But you cannot just simply use make these political, right, agenda to be the overriding voice and subordinate you have to understand, you have to evaluate everything within the human limitations, historical determinacies, necessities, cultural conditions. So many factors need to be brought into the picture rather than just simply affirm or repudiate. This affirmation and repudiation is something that Bakhtin was very much opposed to, because it doesn't allow you to move on to another level. It doesn't allow you to understand. You cannot understand. You cannot evaluate anything without even understanding. You have to sort of understand the text. So this is the sort of Dostoevsky's polyphonic now. The polyphony that he finds in Dostoevsky's works is really very incredible, because polyphony means what is the author's position vis-a-vis the characters that he creates. So he just simply orchestrates, it's a very musical kind of a metaphor, polyphony. You are only orchestrating the multiple voices, very divergent viewpoints, in order to sort of let the story kind of emerge. Not just simply make closed statements. And you see, he's opposed to the author cannot use the hero as a mechanical mouthpiece to just simply, voice his ideology or thoughts or anything. That is like controlling the character, right? So the plurality of consciousness is what that he very elaborately talks about. And that polyphony is something that led to my work on Mahabharata, because I couldn't find another text that is so polyphonic, because there are so many characters, each one coming with a different kind. Any student of literature must, I think, read Mahabharata. And, I've presented Mahabharata in so many parts of the world. Most of the times when I say I can talk about any other subject matter, they don't want to talk about Mahabharata. And recently, when I gave a presentation in York University last year or 2 years back, whenever, I started the talk at 6 o'clock. I thought, why would these Canadians be interested in Mahabharata? And lo and behold, I started at 6 o'clock. It wouldn't end till 11 o'clock. The people were practically sucked into the story and they wouldn't let go, Then I had to, guys, just leave me at my hotel, enough. I mean, I can't handle this. It's too long time. Anyway, but any literary text does that. A good piece of literature, pulls you into that text and you're not able to kind of let go of it. It becomes an obsession. And that is the sort of beauty of literature. Although I'm a psychologist, I borrow from literary theories only because it gives me insights into the human condition, whether it is about pathos of the human condition, whether it is about the celebration of the human spirit, no matter whatever the case might be, that range of emotions is something that literature gives you. And now let me move on to Carnival, which will be, because the whole world of open-ended world would be incomplete without the catalyzing effect of Carnival. Why Carnival is? Because Carnival redistributes power. So when you look at in the world history, whenever the emperors whenever there was the culture was flourishing immensely, they were open to new ideas. They were open to be laughed. Carnival is marked by coarse language, right? It's a folklore. It doesn't sort of have the polished, aspects of language, but instead it is the very earthy. It's very grounded, right? And it celebrates that free laughter. Now, let me make it very clear. And it even has very salty language. Kind of profanities are allowed in that space and time. And for Bakhtin, this was very critical because this is what really pushes the argument. It catalyzes new. Otherwise, things just simply get into a stale, situation. And you cannot be consuming stale ideas, just as how you can't consume stale food or fruits, right? So it cautions you, because when something is just simply too homogeneous, and there are, homogeneity is not good even for our genetic makeup. Even the gene pool, the genome has to have new genes coming into the picture. Otherwise, there would be deformities, right? If you're marrying within the same group or the same, then there will be deformities. That is genetically proven. So similarly, in the world of ideas too, you need this. And why this sort of license is given for salty language and laughter, as I pointed out earlier. I mean, Bakhtin wrote his dissertation on Rabelais, and it was very kind of controversial. I mean, he was sort of accused of this carnivalesque excess, and then I tell my friends in the Western world, wait till you read some Kashmir thinkers, you will know what real naughtiness is. You know? In a serious way, you want to go really get there. You go to the, take a book of Kashmir. They know what satire is like, they know what. So I tell them, that's why to me it's very special to talk to you guys because this is very critical. I think today we have arrived at a time and dialogue is dying. It's a very sad, right? Am I right? And we are not able to sort of really engage with fellow human beings on a human level. Everything is about staging, and this is unsustainable. And I hope this coronavirus, post-COVID, we learn better about
getting questions now. That's nice.
Oh, is there other questions?
Yeah, there are some actually.
Okay, please go ahead and
please shoot. Anyone can ask anything they want.
Yes.
Do you have questions? Please.
Yeah, we do have questions. The first one is from Farhat Qayyum. Ma'am, can you please explain that among all the personalities that you found different in the persona of Bakhtin, what made you imbibe his great understanding of the world?
See, because...
So actually how Bakhtin inspired you, that's what she wants to know.
Sure. Because Bakhtin, I was very drawn to him because it was not a fixed kind of a philosophy. It was dialogue between philosophies, dialogue between philosophies. So dialogue between the self and the other, dialogue between the past and the present, dialogue between cultures. In order to, what was his name, that student or whoever who asked the question?
Farhat Qayyum.
Farhat. So the issue here is, and the beauty of it actually is, I don't need to renounce who I am in order to respect the other. That to me was the central point in Bhakti. I remain who I am. I don't need to give up who I am. Nobody needs to give up who they are. That would be really an affront to your own identity.
Yes.
You can't cease to be who you are, right? You have to be who you are. And so it doesn't sort of, you don't need to negate the other in order to affirm the self. True. The other can be other and the self can be self. In fact, that is what is important. Don't pull everybody into your orbit.
Right.
Live in a world of differences. Even corporations today are very much sort of keen on bringing multiple voices.
Yes,
diversity, as I said, is not just simply in the American context, who's a Mexican and who's a Polish, or in the Indian context, who's a Bengali and who's a Gujarati and who's a Kashmiri. That's not what diversity. Diversity of ideas is important.
Yeah.
Divergent viewpoints are important. Did I answer your question?
I don't know whether she can be audible. We have another question from my friend Diba Sarmad, actually. Good question, actually.
Sure.
How does Kashmiri folklore emerge as a counter-narrative to dominant discursive political identity of Kashmir?
That's a very historical question. That's a historical, thank you, Diba. That's a historical question. And I think I should leave that to you to explore because you should do your dissertations on those topics because I don't have the knowledge of the content area and it wouldn't be fair to say something nonsensical.
Can I say something? I would just, can I intervene? Can I say something?
Sure.
Yeah, hi. It's been lovely listening to you. It's really a pleasure and an honor at the same time. Because I was just thinking, the question came to my mind because I was just thinking that generally speaking, folklore is basically rooted in anonymity per se, and you know, is as often, more often than not, an oral tradition. So when we compare it to the written, and sometimes it is at a discrepancy or at loggerheads with the written, contemporary.
Absolutely. They both need, that's a very good point, and I'll explain this. They both need each other. The classical texts need the folklore, and the folklore need that. And you hit the right word, Diva, and that is anonymity. You know, if separation and individuation is important for identity formation.
Exactly, your point.
And you carnival space and time, you cannot always live in carnival, but you kind of blend into you are lost, you shed. See, because this sense of separation and individuation can create an abnormal sense of significance of the self.
Yes.
Right? So you shed all that.
Right.
All that, and you dissolve into the collective. So carnival space is really for justice for all. It is an all-inclusive space.
Yes.
It's very important. It's an all-inclusive space that, you know, whether you are emperor or whether you are a pauper, they all partake in the communal feast. You eat the same food.
Thank you so much.
Anonymity is something that you need to work on. Go on.
It was just a take on your the mention of the words that you use, the astitva versus the hyper individualism. You know, just another take on that maybe.
That's a very yes. Do you want me to elaborate on that?
No, thanks so much. Pleasure again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So we have a personal question from
Abina, can I?
Yes, ma'am, of course, please.
Or give a chance to the student first.
No, ma'am, please. Aap boliye phir.
Acha ji. Professor Lakshmi, I have to tell you that I did not know at the very beginning that you would be talking about this philosophy. You would be talking about the concept of self. You know how important it is to have diverse views and to respect each other's views.
Yes.
I'm so happy that you've talked about dead consciousness and living consciousness and concepts like, you know, individualistic values, narcissism, and you know how important it is for an individual to get into a dialogue. I have to also tell you that I am a student of human development, and you are a professor of psychology. Yes, it's a pleasure.
Human development.
Yes, I've done my master's in child development and family studies from MS University of Baroda, Gujarat.
Oh yeah, oh, how lovely. Okay.
Yeah, way back in '86. Yeah. So this like, you know, sounds very familiar to, like, you know, what I think, how important it is for an individual to get into a dialogue with your own self. That is one. Two is a dialogue with others. And of course, when we talk about, you know, conflict resolution at the larger level, at the macro level, not at the micro level, like, you know, how important it is. You talked about, you know, when children see their parents quarreling, and then suddenly they realize that this is the kind of resolution or solution. Now, how do you think can we take this dialogue? Because if you look at the contemporary times, we realize that, you know, as human beings, we've lost the patience. We are not tolerant. We are not tolerant of each other's views. We don't respect each other's viewpoint. So how do you think can we take this dialogue from self to the larger level, you know, where we think of resolving certain conflicts, maybe regional conflicts or state conflicts or country conflicts?
No, that's very true, because whether it is psychologically healing from trauma or whether it is, we need to understand one thing. One thing that I sort of came to my mind when I was reading a very rare piece that Bakhtin wrote in 1943, very dark period. He himself suffered so much. He was imprisoned because of his, you know, views on religion and things like that. And then because he was so ill, he was transferred. So it was just, otherwise all the Bakhtin circle, members of the Bakhtin circle were just shot dead. So, so when he wrote about this piece, I realized, the most tormented individual, or the region that has been tormented by conflict, while it can become a breeding ground for extremism or anything, but the same soil, this is very important, the same soil can become fertile for new ideas to emerge. The very same soil. That is a big hope. Because the one who has experienced so much conflict knows how they cry for a new world. So that's the reason that the same land or this time that sort of has led to this absolute inhuman kind of, it becomes that's why it is very rewarding to read Bakhtin, or actually about dialogue itself, right? Because through that healing can take place. After all, when a person goes into therapy, what exactly are they having an interest? The therapist is not telling do this and do that. The therapist is just simply listening. I hear you, I hear you. And when they hear that, the healing begins. Right? It is through the dialogue. Go on.
Yeah. So we have with us today Dr. Zaman Azurda, former professor of Urdu, University of Kashmir. We're actually honored to have him here, and he has some observations. Kindly unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you very much. I just want to
You're
make
welcome.
an observation. Firstly, I must thank and congratulate Professor Yasmin Nashai that she could manage it, because it is really with our this 2G, whatever you call it, network or any other thing, 2G, to manage all this within this, it is really a miracle for us. This talk was so brilliant, but I tell you very honestly that I could understand that it was a cocktail of so many theories, so many faculties, and so many philosophies, because perhaps you are so ambitious that you want to have in one sitting everything that somebody has acquired throughout her or his life. And it's not just done, especially when students are there. You have to go by step with certain philosophies separately. I was very much, and I should say, surprised that when she made use of mirror. I was thinking that she is showing us the mirror, what we have been in the past and what we have been doing throughout this period, and what are we now. I'm so thankful to you that you gave us a chance to be a part of this, and it is very, very, very appreciable. And I think you must continue with it. My hat is off to the organizers that they could manage within these limited resources. They could remind us of Abhinav, perhaps Anand Vardhan, I couldn't hear his name.
Yes.
But there's, and Khemendra. Then others also, how they theorized what human mind is, what the relation of art and literature could be, then what the relation of a person with another person could be. How they, when we go to the mirror, it's not that what is in the mirror that we see. Perhaps we go with the image, with ourselves, and we find that image only. It was so nice, very brilliant talk. Thank you and congratulations.
It's a great honor, sir. Thank you to hear. I hope to meet you someday. Go to Kashmir.
Humble.
Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Thank you so much, sir. We have another question from Farhat Koyum. She says, ma'am, you mentioned you're a psychologist. Which branch of psychology do you belong to?
Okay, I am a developmental psychologist, and that's what led to this book. I think Dr. Rashai would be happy, and this book is available on my Difference, Dialogue and Development, because I am making the argument that the reality of differences in the world necessitates a dialogue, and only when you respond to the call of dialogue, there can be real development. Otherwise, it would just simply be a pseudo kind of concept. So that is very critical. Technically speaking, I'm a developmental psychologist, I'm very much influenced by another. I don't know how these Russians came and occupied my life.
Occupied your life, right?
Lev
Okay.
Simonovich Vygotsky wrote a book called The Psychology of Art.
True.
And he takes Shakespeare's Hamlet to probe into the psychological conditions of
That's very
It's
interesting.
a very brilliant book.
Yes.
And I suggest all faculty and students to take a look at their works because
Please
go
continue.
ahead, another question.
Okay. We have certain, no, this is not a question actually, it's a compliment. Feels good to see you in a Kashmiri sari. It reflects how dedicated you are.
I wanted to honor you guys.
Yeah, there are many thank yous and a lot of people are thanking us. And then, ma'am, your way of delivering is so polite. So nice to hear you.
Oh, how
And
sweet.
thanks you for that.
But I want questions. We are in a dialogue here, remember?
Thank you, organizers. Thank you, ma'am. Where is it? Okay, ma'am, a few more words on dialogic imagination, please. That's from Masood Malik. He's a faculty member.
Oh, sure. See, the dialogic method, dialogic imagination. Yes, see, the dialogic imagination primarily is about the exuberance and vitality of the novel, all about dialogicality in general. So what he finds, whether you read both Dostoevsky's Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics and the dialogic imagination in conjunction. And the reason is what the long essay on forms of time and chronotope in the novel. Chronotope basically is time and space in the narrative. So one of the most important thing is to have sharp analytical categories to classify a text. What exactly is the thematic, plot and the content and the style? The most important thing to learn about genres. Genre is basically the eye of the mind. How are you looking at the world? So genres are really incredibly varied, and genre appraises reality, and reality clarifies genre. So it's a two-way stream. So he was dead against this sort of a formalism, as if that all meanings are contained in the text. And instead, what you get in reading about the dialogic imagination is, it is really at the contact point between the reader and the text that is the space where the meanings emerge. And this is something that the ancient India, Bhartrhari already mentioned about it. So when you look at any kind of a tradition, open tradition, and I would say even the Sufi tradition has this kind, because it is based on relationship now. It is based on a relationship, your search for divine in whatever forms, but that is fundamentally dialogic. And that's why it is so appealing. I'm a big fan of Qawwali music.
All of us are. So.
I know.
Yeah.
So that is what is sort of very critical, in reading that. So it provides you with the sharp analytical tools to sort of a granular kind of reading of the text and understanding of it.
Okay.
That is very critical. I hope I answered.
We have another question from a participant with a very interesting name. The name is 1+5. So,
okay.
How do we reconcile the divide between Eastern psychology that focuses more on Atma with the Western psychology that focuses more on the pathologies?
Pathology is something that is very Freudian. But I see it as we don't need to reconcile. That is the beauty of the dialogic world.
Yes.
They exist.
Everyone has their own space.
And you can use theories effectively at the right time and the right space. So sometimes, teaching Freud, I usually teach him with great deal of passion. He is a great archaeologist of this dark, unconscious world. It has its place and time, and sometimes I just don't find it very appealing. It depends on the situation. Similarly, if I have to be constantly trapped in the world of Atman, it's too abstract. I want the ground reality. So I have to get to the sort of the ground, world, because very often when we dwell in this abstraction, it also gives room for a certain kind of a dogma, and I don't want to sort of be trapped in that dogma. That's why this sort of variety is incredibly rewarding.
So we have many thank yous coming in, but no more questions, I think. But there are so many things that I actually jotted down that you said that echoed.
Please, we are in lockdown, so
I'll just read out these lines to you because they're so beautiful. Culture reveals itself in the presence of the other culture. So how that shows like how much we need the other.
Yes.
And then problems cannot be resolved by denying the past. We have to accept it. That's what you said. Or art is not life. Why did you say art is not life? I didn't really get that.
See, the genesis of art is in life. But art is a kind of that's what even Abhinav Gupta in his commentary on Natya Shastra would say, that it is rasa, meaning that it is an extraction of the very essence of it.
Is it always pleasurable rasa or?
No,
to pleasure as such?
Simply getting to the depth and dimension of any emotion. So whether you are a poet or a dancer or a writer or any kind of occupation, activity that you are in, then what happens is that we are able to sort of, it takes you to a certain elevation, right? But that aesthetic vision must also once in a while come in contact with the coarseness of language. So people use these languages, and I see Farah has a question about supered. One of the important concepts that Bakhtin talks about is that in any conversation, there is the super addressee. We are answerable. You're answerable to your cultural history. You're answerable to whatever. See, we are not just simply talking to each other all the time, anytime. There is a presence of another invisible party there, and that would be the super addressee. We are not just addressing to one person. So if I'm giving this talk, I'm also answering to Mikhail Bakhtin, who was very instrumental and critical in my life. Right? And you're also talking to Kashmir specific. You're talking to India specific. You're talking to a global, audience specific. So as you're grounded, then your consciousness sort of widens. So art is the genesis. Life is the genesis of art, but you cannot. But life is not art.
Life is not art. True.
Life is not art. Life is
very well answered.
Very prosaic, right? Quotidian,
right?
Boring. So whereas art allows you to enrich life, and art has to answer to life too.
Art is not right.
Art, Mahabharata cannot simply preach on one thing, but Mahabharata also has to be accountable for the avastha of life, everyday life. Right?
Then you talked about something very strong. Declarative statements are a waste of time, which is so true. And history cannot imprison us. That's one of the most beautiful lines. I thought I should write it down quickly. History cannot imprison us. There is no need to glorify history. So the present and the past are really, in that way, no different from each other. There are positives and negatives to each era, aren't there?
But they engage
they're different.
in a dialogue. They exist alongside. So the ancient past is not sealed off. Sometimes we need to recover the gems from the historic past, and we need to dispense with the ugly
negativity
of the past too. So historically affected consciousness means when to invoke history and when not to invoke history. That is very critical.
Yes. And then
Go ahead.
binaries are always problematic.
I think
That's what he
Mrinal
said,
wants to ask a question.
Let me see.
Hello, madam. I'm sorry if I'm visible or not visible. I don't know. Probably I am.
You're not visible, but I can
probably
hear
but we can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to hear you. It's wonderful.
We can see him.
Can you see me?
Yes,
I'm
yes,
not
we can see you.
very good
Hi.
at technology. I just had, I mean, it's a wonderful debate you began and so on and so forth. I mean, I come more from Abhinavan, as you know. I mean, I work more on Abhinavagupta. Yes. But when you talked about this oppressiveness in art, so I was trying to understand in this this idea of subjectivity and objectivity, subject and object relationship, and then you are, I mean, like Abhinavagupta, you know, annihilating the binary, for instance. But this oppressive in art, what do we understand by that? How do you understand this oppressive in art? What is oppressive in art?
Oh, okay. What is oppressive in art is when the creator takes complete charge, you know, of the characters or the art form. So they don't allow the art to emerge, and instead it is, so they are exercising enormous amount of control, and that becomes oppressive because they're not letting go of the very creation. So that is fundamental to any kind of a creative work. See, when you read certain texts, you feel that the author is hammering his or her ideas onto you. That is very oppressive. I don't want that. I want to sort of feel free when I'm reading it. And the other part is reading of it also cannot be oppressive. In other words, when you take only these empty phantom categories of politics and political ideology, in order to read a very complex, understand a very complex human avastha, human condition, right? That also becomes oppressive because you're using very fixed templates or oppression comes in another form, you know, by claiming neutrality. But Bakhtin has a very beautiful expression or a phrase called personalism. In the Indian traditions, we call it manodharma. I've been trained in Carnatic music, you know, and I learn both Hindustani too. So the most important thing when you learn a music is to have a certain sense of, you are affixing your signature. When you affix your signature, you don't engage in epistemic violence because you're taking ownership. You know, neutrality is a very clever ploy to wash your hands off.
True.
You know, that is oppressive. So oppression comes in many forms. The other thing, Abhina, you would appreciate this is that dogmas also come in many forms. If there's dogma, I don't even know these categories, like right, left, I don't care. Dogma is a dogma, fight the dogma. Bakhtin writes very eloquently in his book about what the philosophy of religion must do is address the very problem of dogma. Religion itself is not, you know, oppressive. How you use it is oppressive. How you use it is very oppressive, right? So we need to sort of release ourselves from those shackles, you know, from those chains, if you will. And that is very critical. That's why, you know, my next book, I hope I'll be able to work on it. I've called it Language, Reality, and Laughter. Dialogues between Bhartrhari, Abhinavagupta, and Bakhtin. And in a way, I want to give a greater to the, at least to the Russian world, for Bakhtin was sort of really accused of these grotesque excesses and everything. I said, I will show you what real grotesque body images and real laughter, real excess of laughter. No, carnivalesque laughter is not laughing at somebody. You are giving invitation to laugh with someone. Okay. You are telling me, come and laugh with me. It is a very communal thing. Yeah, I I think somebody is asking.
Okay, yeah, somebody's asking a question. We have a question from Muskan. Hello, ma'am. I'm a student of Women's College pursuing BSc. I don't know if I'm right in saying this, but nowadays having a different view, I mean, being individualistic is not appreciable always. And being a student, many a times I just step back and I feel that it's quite often, how can one deal with such situation, particularly as a student? How should we behave, involve ourselves, or stand out? Standing out for me has always been difficult. As a psychologist, you can answer her.
Broad,
yes.
That's a very broad question. On one hand, constantly wanting this validation of your ideas, I find that problematic too. You know, students always, this is how I feel. Well, you haven't even learned Kant and Hegel and others. And why am I going to give you the chance to sort of say, my impressions? Okay. Your impressions are just a little bit important. But you first, if I look at it as a generational difference, I don't know, I come from a generation where we first learned theories, and then we began questioning it, challenging it.
I guess this is more like she's asking you a question as a student to a teacher, and probably thinks that as a psychologist, you might be able to help her.
Okay.
Not really. Not really what you think it is.
Then it's fair. It's a fair question.
Yeah, it's a fair question then, yes.
Whether it is a relationship between the author and the hero, or the teacher and the student, it has to be very dialogic, right?
Yeah.
The teacher must also sort of step down in order to allow the, in other words, they have to shift their genre.
Come, say hi.
The student also must sort of not yield, but at least give a hearing. So the millennial generation, I think, sometimes has the tendency to that. This is what I believe in, and I must be heard. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay, we have.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we have one more question. Ma'am, what is the difference between Bakhtin's notions of dialogism and double voicing in regard to everyday literary practices such as diary writing?
Double voicedness, multi-voicedness, they're all aspects of dialogicality. Because our language is never so straight. It goes in zigzags and coils. So there is always beautiful text, great literary text. When you hear that voice from a character, they're very multi-voiced. There are all sorts of ambiguities. Without the double voicedness or multi-voicedness, it would be monologism. And that would be dangerous. It won't be, it's an affront to dialogue, right?
Monologues are always dangerous, right?
Yeah,
okay,
our monologic impulses are too strong.
Yeah. We don't have any more questions as such. Just a lot of thank yous coming in. And I think we should call it a day.
Oh, well.
Or if you have anything to say, anything more you want to say?
I hope to visit Kashmir someday, very soon, hopefully.
You're so welcome. There's a whole lot of us here now who will welcome you when you come.
I would love to. And as Professor, if you want to kind of have another more, I know today I just gave a very broad sweep of Bakhtin's ideas.
We would love to have you again, and probably so a few times so that we can break it down for the students.
Available, and it's truly a great honor, and I liked all the thoughtful questions that came.
Very good question.
It really opens up the dialogic possibilities. And I think this is very important for the world to know that we can dialogue, that we can engage in these serious discussions. I appreciated Dr. Rashai's thoughtful comments and your comments and many other questions. Because contained in, as Abhinav Gupta would say, I think Mrinal might correct me if I'm wrong, that the womb of an answer is there in the question itself. So what is important for students is, or even any research scholars, the way you frame the question, research question, determines the scope and the possibilities of the answers that you seek. So if your question is very limiting, the answer that you're going to get is also going to be very limited. So you have to sort of, go ahead.
We
please.
have one more question, and I think this will be the last one that we take.
Abhina, can I?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, of course.
Abhina?
Please. Yes, ma'am.
I thought, before you forget, we have to thank Professor Shabir, because he was the one, for a very important point I want to make is, he was the one who allowed this dialogue between all of us and Professor Lakshmi, and he was the one to facilitate this. So, you will have to thank him. I'm sorry I forgot to mention his name in the beginning.
Ma'am, I have a whole list of thank yous here that I was getting into in a bit.
Okay, this is, I'll fail in my
Where is
duty if I
Shabir?
don't mention
I don't see him. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
So this is the last question that we will take. Okay. I'm a new student of literature. Where should I begin reading Bakhtin? As a student, she is just beginning to read this, and where should she start?
Oh, well, go about in any of the book, because just to give you a sense, his later works are much more accessible. But to understand the depth, the speech genres and other late essays. But to understand the philosophical depth of his thinking, you have to go to his early works. So they have to be, as I said, enter the Bakhtin's world, and then there is a lot of adventure.
Truly. I think we are all intrigued. It has been an eye-opener for all of us.
Yeah.
I don't think most of us knew who he was really. Even I didn't know. I just started reading about him a couple of days before because I was so intimidated. But I think we did quite well. We've been able to generate a lot of interest. And thank you so much, Lakshmi.
Oh, thank you very much. I hope I was not just wandering off because...
Oh, no, not at all. You were very interesting, very informative, and very interesting.
No, but there
now my thank yous, ma'am. Yasmin, ma'am, please. Thanks are due to many people for the success of this webinar. I begin by thanking Professor Shabir, who introduced us to Lakshmi. And thank you so much for doing that. And we have to thank
can I
our
see him?
principal,
Where is he?
Professor. I don't think you can see him. Shabir, are you somewhere there? I don't think so.
Oh,
he might be there, but maybe we can't see him.
Oh, okay.
He's logged in. He can.
Okay, he is logged. He can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, he can hear you.
Hello,
if you want to say something.
Hello, Lakshmi.
Good.
Yeah.
I was just, hello.
Yes,
I
I
hear
can
you.
hear you.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
audible.
Yeah, I was just engrossed in your lecture and, and these questions, and I'm very happy to see you also and listen to your beautiful talk. And hope to see you again. We'll move on with some other programs or also later on.
In person, hopefully.
Extremely, I'm, highly indebted to you that you actually, after a busy schedule, you got some time for us. And
No, actually, this gives me some purpose to be not at all. It's nothing that glorious.
Yes.
It just allows me to take from all this crazy world that we are living.
And I'm at the same time very happy that our students also got introduced to Bakhtin and his philosophies. And it is the kind of foundation stone. And we'll build it up and have more dialogues. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shabir. Thank you.
Over to you, Abhina.
Yeah.
The student who asked where should she start or something. I think this is a small book, and all the chapters I have uploaded it on my academia page. So you would get a broad introduction. Not that I want to pitch my work. It's just that it allows you to get a broad sense of what Bhakti's works are all about.
I have one more question. I'll squeeze this in because this is from my colleague and I just can't not do it.
No problem. I'm fine.
Ma'am, you did mention that art can't remain unanswerable to the paradoxes of life. How can you relate it to the open-endedness of the text? Does that mean we have no absolute answer?
all absolutes are problematic to begin with.
Yeah, that's
so everything is left open-ended. There is a loophole in every text. There is also a momentary rhythmic closure to anything. That's why it's dangerous for us to just simply completely be lost in the cultural flux. Right? So it is this sort of loopholes and rhythms keep you very much sort of intact. I didn't even touch upon many other deeper philosophical concepts like soul and spirit and whether Bakhtin tried to redeem theology via aesthetics or aesthetics via theology is an open question in his early work, Art and Answerability. So when people live under very oppressive conditions with a gun to their head, they have to write in a lot of riddles so that they have an escape clause, So it's very, it's not so easy living under these conditions with a gun to your head and to be able to write. So they all had to pay some kind of a lip service to Marxism and so on and so forth. So it's a very open question.
Okay, so that was a question from Tuba Rashid, my colleague. So back to the thank yous now. So thank you, Professor Yasmin Ashai. You are an institution in yourself, and your zeal is actually infectious. You always inspire us to outdo ourselves, actually. Next, thanks are due to the organizing committee who worked tirelessly to put all these webinars together. As this is our last, I thank all the participants from all the webinars, all the speakers, everybody. And a special thank you to Professor Rashid, who as always worked very meticulously. I want to thank all our speakers, participants, everyone who listened to us, anyone who posted questions or took time out to listen to us. Thank you so much. And last but not the least, of course, I have to thank you, Lakshmi, for such a erudite and a compelling talk. It has been amazing, so interesting. We are all interested in Bhakti. We are all Bakhtin fans now, actually. So we would love for you to speak to our students again. I will get back to you with feedback, and I will, yes, definitely.
It would be my privilege and honor to do that. And where would I go on YouTube to find this?
I'll post you a link. I'll send you a link.
I'll email you the link.
We'll email it to you, or I'll WhatsApp it to you.
Oh, mail me.
So in case I left anyone out of the thank yous, omission is purely unintentional, no offense. And then thanks again. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. It was so nice to meet you.
Kashmir. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate this.
Thank you. Bye.
Let's keep the dialogue.
Bye, everybody.
Let's continue.